So, I just did a video where I talked about people being all up in their feelings, uh, getting opinion and feelings combined and either ignoring or missing the truth. And that reality in general is not what popular opinion would think it is, which is why a lot of politicians, a lot of really educated people are very, very good at manipulating opinions and getting things that they want, or encouraging people to do things that are advantageous to them, not necessarily advantageous to the majority. So anyway, this time I'm not going to use the Somalia incident as an example. I'm going to use a more personal incident that happened when I was at Bad Tolz in Germany during the time I was in the military. So, for those people out there who are familiar with Bad Tolz and the Special Forces unit that's down there, and a course called Platoon Confidence training. I was in the finance office. I'm sorry. I was a finance clerk at one time in my military career. Later, I went to work on a site in Germany. And I had an infantry MOS, but my working MOS was 95 Bravo, because we were security on a site in Germany. Now, the thing that people in the know would understand is that basically when you're infantry and you're on a base that is more administrative in the duties you do or security oriented, you don't practice basic infantry tactics every day. You're assigned to do a job that doesn't always coincide with what infantry training would have you doing. So this course came up called it Platoon Confidence training. And being an NCO in the Army whose primary MOS was infantry, I decided, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep as much on top of infantry as I can, even though I'm working as a sergeant in the security field. So when the Platoon Confidence training course came up, I volunteered to go, so I could practice at least for 30 or so days. Actually, at the time I volunteered, I thought it was a 30-day course. And Sergeant Major approved the course and and had us come up to his up to the battalion headquarters, and he gave us a briefing and everything, and he explained to a bunch of us infantry NCOs, corporals and sergeants, that the unit was more administrative and security or maintenance. So we would be depended upon to help soldiers pass this course. As he didn't just want us to go down there and learn a few things and train a little bit. He wanted us to actually prove proficiency enough to complete the course and get a certificate that said we graduated instead of a certificate that said we attended. And so he said he expected us with infantry experience to guide the platoon through the course. To make a long story short, we got down there, we went on the course, and we were out in the field. And the lieutenant, who was not infantry, and the platoon sergeant, who was not infantry, were telling us to do these different things, and being infantry, or trying to keep up with infantry, even when I wasn't working in infantry, I would disagree with them from time to time. A particular case in point is very similar to the Somalia incident. We got a packing list to take equipment to the field. Now, I looked at the packing list and thought it was a good packing list, even though it was in the summertime. The temperature was in the high 90s every day. We were going into the French Alps, or the foothills of the French Alps, because we were at Bad Tolz in Germany. So, while we're getting this packing list together, I'm passed by another platoon and some other soldiers that were squads that were getting ready, and I noticed that their packing list was not being followed. They were short equipment that they should have had. So I asked about that, and they told me that the lieutenant had told them they didn't have to carry all that unnecessary winter equipment because it was in the 90s. And some of my squad heard this and they started complaining, and to which I responded that you're going to take all the equipment that's on the packing list, or we're going to have a problem. Now, they weren't very happy with that, and I was this butt wipe, this a-hole, because I said take everything even though they didn't want to. So, to make a long story short, the lieutenant said they didn't have to take the cold weather sleeping bag, the wool blankets, the change of clothes. That was all heavy gear to carry in your pack, and there was no need for it. So rather than have a rebellion, I compromised. I told them, okay, so you only have to take, in the whole squad, you only have to take 4 cold weather sleeping bags. You have to take the wool blankets, you have to take towels, you have to take extra clothes. And I compromised a little bit and let them not take certain items, okay? But I made sure and even carried myself everything on the packing list in some quantity. And there was grumbling and everything, but since I had broken it down and didn't require everybody to take the equipment, they passed it among themselves, and we went on. Now, me, myself, personally, I had just about everything on the packing list in my possession. And again, that was not a popular thing, and everybody was talking bad. And they were mad because of this, So we get out to the field, and a couple of days out, we're traveling and we cross a stream. Now, like I said, we were in Bad Tolz, okay, in the foothills of the French Alps, okay. So the streams that we were crossing and the waterways and stuff like that, temperature was 26 degrees because the ice from the caps was melting. And we crossed a couple of those, and one evening we stopped as we were traveling, navigating and everything, in our tactical formations and all that good stuff. Like a good infantry sergeant, when we stopped for the night, I went and checked every one of my people. I walked around the perimeter, set everybody in their positions, alternated times on guard, alternated them in all the activities that an infantry soldier is expected to do, and talked face to face for at least 5 minutes with everyone in my squad. So next morning we got up and we're ready to leave, and the lieutenant comes and he says, "Hey, we're gonna leave and we need to get out of here. So let's pack up and go." Uh, so I went back around and I checked everybody, and everything seemed to be okay. But I had a guy that I wanted to watch closely, and so he was my RTO. So I figured I'd have him right there beside me. When I got back to camp and we were getting ready to move out. Lieutenant told me, he said, "I want your squad on point, but I want your radio operator." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you have the best trained radio operator in the platoon, and I want him with me." So we were playing war games, so there were going to be these situations where you need to use the radio. And he stroked my ego, so I was a little bit negligent because I let him stroke my ego, and I let him have my RTO, and I should have fought him. I really should have fought him harder, but I let him have my radio guy, and we take off on the mission. We're out there, and we're going through the woods and across these streams and everything. Now, to give you an idea of how bad things were, my pack was so heavy that we were climbing up this incline, and my troops were a little bit behind, and I was a little bit impatient with their progress, so I had stepped out of line. My point man was still up there navigating, and I turned and I signaled for them to move faster and come up. And when I leaned down the hill to see what was going on, the pack on my back was so heavy that I somersaulted all the way to the bottom of the incline and had to pick myself up and then catch up with the squad. I only weighed 135 pounds, but I had, because I had carried my radio. Since my RTO was gone, I had, if I remember correctly, I had carried my radio, or at least I alternated with the guy that was replacing my RTO. I think I alternated with him so that they could keep up, because I was infantry. I was used to carrying the radio and all. So anyway, to make a long story short, we figured out that I had about 108 pounds in my pack. Like I said, I weighed 135, 140 pounds at the time. So when I leaned forward, I somersaulted down the hill. But as I said before, the temperature was in the 90s. I was in full uniform with a radio and equipment. So it's pretty, interesting. But anyway, to make a long story short, we get a signal that the formation is stopped. So being that my squad is on point, and I've got the fastest and the best trained navigator and point man. So we're traveling pretty fast, and so I figured it was just so that the other squads could catch up, because they weren't infantry and they weren't in shape like we were. So we stopped and we waited, and after 5 minutes I was like, "Well, what's going on back there?" And I got on the radio and I called to the back, and they said that medical emergency, we need to stop. So I was offended because I didn't mention I was a combat lifesaver. Now, combat lifesavers have a little bit more training than regular soldiers, but they're not experts. However, we have a rank thing in the military, as if you remember. So even though I wasn't the most experienced, I was still a ranking medical person in the platoon. So I was offended because if somebody was hurt or something was going on and nobody bothered to inform me. They say, "Sergeant Walker, you stay up there, we got it." And I say, "No, that's not going to work for me." I said, "I'm coming to the back." So, passed the message back and forth on the radio. And the lieutenant said, no, we don't need you. Now, here's where things get a little sticky, because I didn't listen to the lieutenant. I went to the back. When I get back there, I'm glad I went to the back, because they've got my radio, RTO, on the ground. He's going into convulsions. And they've got him on the ground, and they're holding him down, and they're about to administer an IV. And I'm looking, and they got this cold saline they're about to put in his body. Now, to the average person, the thing is, it's 98 degrees, and everybody is pouring sweat. And so, cold saline is the perfect answer, right? Nope. As I said before, what's popular or what's common for everybody to think is no guarantee that it's the right thing. So I say, hold up, what are y'all doing? They said, well, we're gonna give him an IV because he's a heat casualty. And I said, no, he's not a heat casualty. And they were like, what do you mean? I said, he works for me. If you're not in the infantry, that doesn't necessarily trick any bells. But if you're a true infantry sergeant, then you know that when one of your people says, this guy works for me, he's not what you think he is, you stop and pay attention. Because see, the night before, I was telling you I wanted to watch my RTO. Well, the night before, this guy it rained, and we had just come out of crossing the stream. When I went and I did my eye to eye with all of my soldiers, this guy, his teeth were chattering, and he was so cold and he couldn't get warm. Then I ordered the sleeping bag that I had made those guys carry. I ordered one of them, brought to that location. A wool blanket, a towel, and we took this young man and we stripped all his clothes off, wrapped him in a wool blanket, put him in the sleeping bag, and had another soldier get in the sleeping bag with him so that he could warm up. So this happened about 9 o'clock at night. So by the next morning, he had warmed up, he was feeling better, and he was walking around. But I wanted him with me because I wanted to make sure that he was all right. But anyway, to go back to the story, the lieutenant, who knew nothing about infantry, and the platoon sergeant, who knew nothing about infantry, ignored me. So I called to the front and asked for one of my corporals, who was this huge guy that should have been playing professional football, but he wasn't because of knee injury. And he came back there, and I told him, I said, break the fingers of the next person who touches our radio operator. And he said, okay. And so everybody backed off, and then the evaluator came up, and he goes, what's going on? And I told him, and he said, sir, to the lieutenant, said, this guy right here is real infantry. I've been observing, and he's the only one who's doing everything correct. I saw him walking from post to post checking his people last night. If he says the guy is a hypothermia victim, I believe him. He said, but for safety's sake, we're going to call to the back and we'll talk to the people in the back. Well, we called to the back, and Special Forces medic got on the line. And he asked what the problem was, and we told him. He said, well, if I understand this right, if he's a heat casualty, he won't die in the next 5 minutes. He said, if he's not a heat casualty, you'll kill him by putting the saline in his body, because the ice cold saline will give him a heart attack. So he said, take his temperature, wait 5 minutes, and take his temperature again. We took his temperature. His temperature was at 97 degrees. We waited 5 minutes, and his temperature was somewhere, I'm almost sure it was 91.3 or something like that. Okay? So the Special Forces medics said, if you stick him with that IV, you'll kill him. Then he asked who had made the correct diagnosis, and they told him I did. He said, okay, you now have a medical emergency. Until you medevac this person, you are no longer in a training exercise, and the sergeant who made the correct diagnosis is now in charge of you moving to an extraction point and getting this guy safely out of there. So, at which point I took over, set up stretcher carriers, got the map, located a good place for a helicopter to land to pick him up, and we did an extraction. Now, I'm saying all of that not because I want a pat on the back and a big award. I did get an award for that from the military, so that was fine. But I'm not talking about that. What I'm doing is I'm talking about the fact that what is popular is not always right just because it's popular. In fact, in the real world, what is popular is the opinions of the masses, and more often than not, they are wrong. Had we gone with popular opinion, they would have killed this young man. Now, a lot of people say, well, yeah, that's a nice story, and you pat yourself on the back, and understand. When they first put me up for an award, I turned them down. And they asked me why. And I told them, because I didn't really want to make waves at first. And I was just trying to be a good soldier. And so instead of telling my lieutenant no when he asked for my RTO, I'm more worried about my career than my soldier. And I almost killed him. If I had listened to the lieutenant and not gone to the back and check to see what was going on, my soldier would have been dead. So, I'm saying all of that to say that people need to stop being up all in their feelings and use common sense and see the world for what it is and see what's going on. If you look at what is going on in the last 7 years of the Donald Trump era, every 90 days, a major talking point by the MAGA crowd becomes a debunked story and a lie. Donald Trump claims to have been exonerated in the Mueller report. We got 3 federal judges that were given access to all the materials from the Mueller report who come back and say there were at least 2 possible charges of obstruction in the Mueller report. Donald Trump was not exonerated. William Barr took a Sharpie to the Mueller report and told you that he was exonerated while restricting access to what was really going on. That's just one example. Another example is what happened with the 2 impeachment trials. Oh, he was exonerated because he wasn't impeached. Well, first off, technically he was impeached. And secondly, he wasn't convicted. Doesn't mean he was innocent, because guess what? You cannot have a member of the jury announce before the trial starts that none of his people were going to vote for a conviction, because that's tampering. He basically said, if you want to survive in your position within this organization, you will give the verdict that we want. If I go to court and the prosecutor announces to the world that I'm convicted before I even get in the courtroom, I get a mistrial. Because they did not look at the evidence. They knew before they started how they were going to vote. So he wasn't exonerated. The trial was fixed in both of the hearings. But see, the vote was along party lines. It wasn't based on opinions. It was 80% on party line, not going by the evidence. I wish everybody the best, and as I said, this is not about personal. This is about reality. Reality is that popular opinion and people being all up in their feelings doesn't match up with the truth or the reality in many cases. Enjoy your evening.